Welcome to RHI Sociable City Interviews, where we meet with global thought leaders on nightlife and the social economy. Today we are joined by Julia Heath, a passionate advocate for independent music and nightlife. She currently serves as the Policy and Outreach Manager in the New Orleans Office of Nighttime Economy. She focuses on developing music policies and initiatives that enhance local nightlife, creating an inclusive environment that supports artists, venues, and audiences. Well, hello. It's so great to see you, and it's so wonderful to learn more about what you're doing in New Orleans since our meeting in San Francisco many years ago.
I know it's good to see you, Jim, and I'm excited to talk about our upcoming summit in Nashville. And yeah, there's been a lot going on.
Okay. Well, can you just talk a little bit about your background and how you got into the role that you're doing and what it is?
Yeah, I have worked pretty much my entire adult career in live entertainment in various ways. I kind of started working in small independent live music venues. I started as a marketing assistant, and I basically worked up and have had just about every position besides being on stage and being a sound engineer. So I've been a marketing director, I've been a talent buyer, a director of operations, general manager. I'd also have done some music festival work in the Bay Area as well. But when the pandemic hit in 2020, my career kind of shifted because obviously all of our venues shut down. There was no live music for a while. And I was involved with a group of people who really focused on advocating for the independent live music sector, and for making sure that everyone got reopened, no one closed. That kind of led to, through that advocacy work, getting involved in legislation. So worked on some state level music venue legislation in California. We created a new liquor license that is specifically for all ages music venues. And then in New Orleans in 2023, they created a mayor's office of nighttime economy, which is kind of a newer city office in this country. It's been a thing in Europe for a while, but basically, offices of nighttime economy focus on everything that happens at night, which is a lot. So the office was founded here. They were hiring, expanding the team. I applied for the job. They offered me the job. I said, twist my arm, I'll move to New Orleans and work on nighttime economy and music policy. And here I am today. So my title right now is the Policy and Outreach Manager in the Office of Nighttime Economy.
Oh, well, that's an important area to focus in on. And what have been your greatest challenge, and what would you say is your accomplished, even in the short time that you've been there?
Yeah, so I've been here. My 2 year anniversary is actually coming up in about 10 days. And many challenges, of course, especially, when I think about my career path and transitioning from independent music venues to city government. So just personally, one of my big challenges was just learning how to navigate those systems and navigate working with people who usually, have meant bad news when you're working at a venue. When someone from the city shows up, it means that you're doing something wrong usually. So navigating that has been a challenge, but from that challenge and from my perspective of, having those experiences, it's been really important to me to change that narrative locally. So I have really, myself and the rest of my office, there are three of us in my office, have really made it a point to make sure that the culture of our office focuses on, one-on-one outreach. And we will show up to restaurants and bars and music venues and spend our own money and have conversations with the bartenders, the general managers, things like that, to really form relationships and kind of build trust. So, it's there are things that are certainly more challenging than sitting in, beautiful restaurants and bars in New Orleans and talking to people, but
Hmm.
it has taken a lot of time to build these bridges and build this trust. But I think we've done a really great job. And through these relationships that we've formed with not only the community, but other city agencies, we've been able to do some really cool stuff in a short time. For example, this year in 2025, we've had a year-long professional development series that focuses on business skills for musicians with our community partner, the Ella Project. So it's been a series of free webinars and workshops and panels all about putting the business and music business as our tagline. We have a grant program that's for music venues, which is there are many parts of this grant program, but long story short, we created a partnership with Loyola New Orleans Music Industry Studies program, and we created a sound engineering class. This class of students is going into the venues that were awarded this grant and basically assessing their acoustics and putting together a sound management plan to make their rooms sound better, but also decrease the number of noise complaints that we're getting from neighbors to ultimately protect the longevity of these venues. And yeah, so that's been really cool. That's, an investment in our venues, but also creating kind of this workforce pipeline directly from the university to real life venues. Yeah, I mean, I could keep talking about this stuff forever. So, but those are some of
No,
my
you've
highlights.
covered a lot of ground, and I think what you're doing with Loyola is really incredibly important because when people think about getting into the music career, sometimes they think that they have to become a musician, but there are so many good paying jobs that are associated with the whole music economy. And like you're saying, the sound engineer, the lighting engineer, the people who work on stage presentations, and now you've got all of these electronic technology shows that go along with the music. And so that all requires unique talents and training and experience to really do a good job.
Yeah,
So I'm really impressed. I didn't know about what you're doing, but I think that's the one gap that's always been missing in education is that it's not just about the musicians, it's about every part of that ecosystem that supports the musicians and basically they're the front of a massive organization that makes a show happen.
yeah.
Now, I don't know if what you just described to me is the tune-up program, the outreach to the businesses and the creating the put business in music theme. Is that part of the t tune-up program?
Yes, that is the Tune Up Grant program that I just jumped right in and explained.
It just
Very
jumped right
excited
in.
about it.
Yeah, so it's basically helping businesses that have music, giving them grants to help support them, establishing this technology support to bring in trained people to work with them on their sound systems and to really begin to integrate music more holistically into a community without creating some of the difficulties.
Yeah.
Now, as we talked before, I had done spent a lot of time in New Orleans doing some of the same kind of analysis that you did. And one of the things that happened back then was, and we talked about this earlier, that Frenchmen Street decided they wanted to create an overlay because they wanted to preserve the true New Orleans music and
Mhm.
not become another Bourbon Street. But you told me that goal has been overshadowed by some of the challenges that these businesses are facing.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, anyone who's been to Frenchmen Street in the past few years could tell you this, but it feels like Frenchmen Street is kind of a mini Bourbon Street these days in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is, Frenchmen Street used to be a place where I think today we have 12 live entertainment venues within a 2.5 block distance. So it's a very dense cluster of live entertainment venues. And it used to be that all of these venues were hosting bands that are playing original music. And, by original music, of course, I mean just songs that they wrote. They're not covering old jazz standards. They're not playing music that they think will attract tourists. But over time, for a variety of reasons, I think mostly because of the shifting pressures of, what it is to run a venue in today's economy, that has changed. So now the venues are looking at skyrocketing insurance rates. Their rent is going up, payroll is higher than ever. The cost of all of the items that they sell, liquor, food, all of it is more expensive. And so they're needing to find a way to kind of close that gap in an industry that's always had razor thin margins. I mean, on a good day, a music venue is going to have like 3% profit margin.
Mhm.
So what they've done to kind of combat that is just try to get as many bodies in their front door as possible. And unfortunately, that means, attracting more tourists who are looking for those covers of traditional jazz music. You come to New Orleans, you want to hear a specific sound, which makes sense, but I wish that there was more value put on the original music that is still coming out of New Orleans today, because there certainly is a lot of it. So that's something, you know, the balancing act of how do we kind of preserve what Frenchman Street was while also helping these venue operators adapt to modern times is something that's always on my mind. It's something that we're always talking about.
Yeah, you bring up when I worked in New Orleans, I met with Papa G. Johnson, and he was a very influential man within that music world. In fact, he was kind of the godfather of Trombone Shorty and his brother James. But what he once told me, he said, in New Orleans, it used to be that you would pay to go listen to music and then you would have a drink. But over
Mhm.
time, that whole music as a commodity that people pay for became a way to get people to come in and buy drinks. And so therefore that New Orleans music was lost in the way that it evolved. And I think what you're saying is that that's still a struggle in New Orleans, is how to preserve that independent music, the original writing by the people that perform. All of that is being lost, is the way that you're telling me. But you think that some of these strategies that you're putting into place will help businesses to reframe how they approach their business to a new market.
Yeah, I hope so. A lot of the things that it's going to take in terms of policy and legislation, these are long-term fixes that aren't going to happen overnight, but we're never going to be able to tell venues, and we should never want to tell venues what kind of music to program, whether or not to charge a cover, how to run their business in any way. But I think what it is going to take is more targeted investment in these venues and recognizing that while these are, technically private sector for-profit businesses, they operate at a loss most of the time. And so we as the city and sometimes in state level conversations need to have the hard conversations of how how do you assign value to culture um, in a way that you know that advocates for an actual dollar investment. So I'm not a fan of every single grant program ever. I think that some grants are just, really small injections that are just, gone to the wind within, a few days. But I think that there are intentional ways that you can create grant programs to fund things like infrastructure, um, support and to fund, specific kinds of programming that alleviate some of the burdens off of these venues while still allowing them to um, operate the way that they want to operate and still have that, kind of freedom on their own. But they do need support or they are going to go away.
Well, I mean, along those same lines, you have state and city support for a music performance hall for symphonies and opera and other types of classical music, and a lot of those are supported by grants, but they're also supported by government. And even the building of an opera house or the building of a music venue can often be supported by government funds because they value the bringing of culture to the community, but it really brings a limited a spectrum of culture, while at the same time ignoring the culture of the more organic music that has made New Orleans what it is.
Right. And I think you mentioned symphonies, and there's this divide between two different kind of classes of music almost, where symphony, classical music, philharmonic type stuff that's seen as kind of highbrow music, but for whatever reason, the music that plays at the Spotted Cat or at the Blue Nile, um, that's kind of lowbrow and it's not as important for whatever reason, even though a lot of the musicians that are playing in the symphony here, they also play on Frenchman Street. And it's all an ecosystem. Um, and that ecosystem needs to be looked at. And you mentioned, live music being a commodity, and that, you hit the nail on the head with that. That's something that I'm always banging my head against the wall, trying to explain to people. This is not, live music is a privilege. It's not a right. These musicians are not here just because, they have nowhere better to be. This is their career and they should be compensated for the work that they're doing. And yeah, a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I might be wrong, but I know Austin did it, and I think New Orleans, at least from the Frenchman Street perspective, there was like a minimum compensation for musicians that had to be given. Is that still kind of a policy locally?
That is not locally a policy. I think, that's a tricky one because telling a business what to pay, contractors essentially is not something that we're able to do. Last year, the city did create an ordinance that basically means that every time a musician is hired by the city to play a gig, there's a minimum amount that they will be paid. So that's only for
Mhm.
city gigs. And I think some of the thinking was, we hope that the private sector venues will follow suit. But unfortunately, like I was saying, when you look at the margins, and all of the other costs that these venues are facing, it's really challenging to kind of mandate how much musicians are being paid.
Yeah. You mentioned a few ways you're talking with some people at the state level. What are some of the areas that you're talking about that the state could be supportive in besides just more direct grants and funding?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big kind of conversation topics we're having right now, state level, is just more collaboration between different cities in Louisiana. We're working on creating a network between, right now it's currently New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Shreveport, or excuse me, Lafayette. We're working on bringing in Shreveport, but just having representatives from all of our music cities come to the table and be able to talk to each other on a regular basis to kind of share our challenges and the opportunities we see because a lot of it's the same. And, coalition building is really the way that you get things done on any level, especially a state level, I think. So
Hmm.
we're working on just getting together as a group, coming up with a strategic plan, more or less, and going to the state with some of these asks. We have some really great allies that are currently in state government in Baton Rouge, so feeling pretty hopeful about this. But also, I mean, we're also talking about a state level music fund that would go to
Hmm.
support the whole ecosystem, through various kinds of grants and things like that. But, focusing on the targeted grants and not just here's $100 to go do whatever. There are obviously, some other states that are working on a state level fund as well. But I think that, yeah, no one likes giving out free money. Few people like asking for free money, but like we've been saying throughout this conversation, there's going to need to be an investment, or a lot of these kind of foundational pieces of the ecosystem are going to go away, and it's going to be really hard to replace them.
Yeah. So I did some work in Lafayette and Baton Rouge, and I have a great story about restrooms from Baton Rouge. But anyhow, you mentioned that these are all music cities that you're trying to bring together, and that's a big kind of term. But what does it actually mean? What makes a music city? And then what are the characteristics of New Orleans that puts them up into that sphere?
Yeah. I mean, you ask any person what a music city is, you're going to get a different answer. My answer is that every city is a music city. They all have different levels of investment from their government, different levels of participation from community members. But I believe that every city is a music city if there is
Mm.
a single person who is at all involved in music, living in that city. So New Orleans, and I know that's kind of a broad, maybe oversimplification, but I'll stick to it and die on that hill. Um, New Orleans is a music city for so many ways, but the main way that it's a music city that comes to my mind is because it is the birthplace of American music. And I think that's something that is cherished here, but I think we need to be louder and prouder about.
Mhm. So when you say birthplace of American music, that's interesting. Why do you say that?
Because New Orleans is where jazz comes from, it's where blues comes from. I know there's still a lot of blues up and down, you know, Louisiana and Mississippi and a lot of other states, but this is really where it started. And
Hmm.
um yeah, and rock and roll came from the blues. All of these other genres that we have today come from the genres that started in New Orleans. And today, New Orleans I think will always be known for jazz first and foremost, but the blues, of course, we have bounce music. We have every single genre of music is represented here. And there are so many incredible musicians that people don't even know about that are playing, anywhere in the city on any given night. And someday I hope that they get just as much shine and just as much attention as the traditional jazz music that people know New Orleans for across the world.
Well, that was a great summary of what makes New Orleans a music city. It's obvious a little bit more in depth than just every city's a music city, but
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, every city's a music city for their own reasons. I was
that's
having
right.
this conversation a couple days ago, and I've had this conversation a lot, but it drives me crazy when people say, well, how can New Orleans be more like Nashville? Or how can we be more like Austin or New York or these other places where that are known for music industry? And it drives me crazy because, Nashville has their own problem. All these other cities have their own problems. And I don't think we should try to be like anybody else. We should try to be the best version of ourselves, but we should also be looking to everybody else, talking to them, learning from and with them. Um, but yeah, we should try to be the best version of ourselves.
Okay. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time and you're doing amazing work. And I look forward to seeing you in the future.
Me too. It's great to chat with you, Jim.
Okay.